Ladies and gentlemen, if you're watching this video and you're hearing my voice, that means that you are taking part in Prep 4. We're going to be talking about how to cite sources credibly using the ICE acronym. The ICE acronym stands for Identify, Check Credibility, and then Express. Now, I love acronyms for many reasons, but mainly it's because I'm very forgetful and I'm absent-minded. So having acronyms always reminds me of what I need to say next. So that's why I like them so much. However, I'm not sure how you'll feel about this acronym, but I guess we'll find out. All right, so let's begin by asking you a simple question. How would you cite a source in your writing? Well, if I had to take a guess, and I will take a guess, it would look something like this. It would be a bunch of information from your source, either in your own words or, of course, as a direct quote, and then you would have that lovely parentheses followed by the last name of the author or authors, the year it was published, and possibly a page number if it's a direct quote. Well, if you were to essentially say this in your speech, the way that it's written, it would sound really weird, wouldn't it? You would be like, well, beginning parentheses, last name of author, year, end parentheses. And that would be awkward, and so we definitely don't want to do that. Instead, we want to cite our sources in a verbal way instead of a written way. So if we write it in a verbal way, that means we can actually say it verbatim in our speech. And this will not only preview what you're going to talk about in this specific source, but it will also let you know whether or not the source is credible. Because see, the way that you cite information in text allows the author to then go to the reference page and actually double check on the sources if they want, but in a speech they can't do that. So how should citations look? Well, you can go to page 30, or you can just keep paying attention and we can look at how the sources are cited in this example on page 30. All right, we're going to look specifically at the second source. If you see, we have a year, we have the author's last name, but you notice there's also a credibility statement. As I just said earlier, we want to have a credibility statement because we don't know who the author is in most cases, right? And so we want to let people know that this is a safe source. So then when you have the year, the last name of the author, and you have some kind of credibility source, then you can go on with the summarization of the source, and the goal is to keep this down to one sentence. And if you're asking why, it's because, again, we want to preview what your source is going to be talking about, but we also want to make sure that our audience knows your source is in fact credible. So as long as you have the year, the author's last name, and a credibility statement, as well as the summary of the source, then we're in good shape, because in your speech, you'll say this verbatim if you want to, and then you'll go into more detail and you'll actually present the ICE source, or you'll price it so that we can get more of those details. This is where you humanize that statistic, or summarize it, or visualize it, and this is where in the testimony you make sense out of it, and then in the example this is where you share more of the actual story. But what's really nice about doing it this way, icing it this way, is you can look right away and you can say, does this source support my main point? So let's look and find out. The main point is waiting until the last minute to work on assignments can lead to severe penalties, and in this source, number 2, we see that students who work on homework assignments late, or rather the day before it's due, do significantly worse than people who do their homework 3 days earlier. Okay, so that tells us right there, yes, this does support the main point. We know the source is credible, and we have a preview statement. Fantastic, right? Well, it's a little more challenging than that. So you're probably wondering, okay, so how do we do that? Well, I thought that it would be best if I actually went through this process with you using an example that I came up with. So if you remember in Prep 2, I talked about the idea of mindsets, or this idea that if we believe that our intellectual ability is like a muscle, we can actually improve it. And so my thought is, using the quote from Henry Ford about whether you think you can or you can't, you're probably right. I took the takeaway and I talked about the idea of success in any venture depending not on your actual ability, but how you perceive it. So then, for my main point, I look specifically at the world of education. And the point is that you can't be successful in education if you don't believe your academic ability can increase. So again, I'm looking for sources that support my main point. So in this case, my main point is, of course, education and mindsets. So let's walk through this process of ICE, or ICE, to see what this is going to look like using a source. So let's look at I. What does it mean to identify the main point? Well, essentially you're checking to see whether or not the source actually supports your main point. So in every source, you're going to find that there's a certain amount of information that you need. And a lot of times it's just going to be a short snippet and you're going to grab it. So how do you identify the main point of the source? Well, first you check to see if it's a testimony, a stat, or example, right? Because you want to make sure that it's one of those forms of support. Then you're going to make sure, as I just said, that it actually supports your main point. Because if the source doesn't support your main point, just keep moving forward. So then, if that checks out, then you want to sum up the source in a way that defends your main point, of course, in your own words. unless it is a testimony. Because remember, if it's a testimony, then you don't have to. All right, so what does this look like? Well, let's find out. I've got a source ready to go right here. And this is from Carol Dweck in 2015. And this is her testimony because Carol Dweck is, well, let's scroll down and see. Oh, she is a psychology at Stanford University and the author of Mindset, The Psychology of Success. So that makes her, I would say, a pretty good expert on mindsets. And she said that her and her colleagues found that students' mindsets, or how they perceive their abilities, played a key role in their motivation and achievement. In fact, by changing students' mindset, they could actually boost their achievement. So I could take this verbatim because it's a testimony, and I could quote Carol Dweck. So then we go to the next step of icing, which is checking the source for credibility. So now you want to verify that the author is in fact credible on the topic that they're discussing. Now, this is where it gets a little bit challenging. So there's three ways that you can check for credibility. Number one, if it's not from a national, well, if it is from a national news source, you're in great shape. That's a credibility statement. All you'd have to say is the author's last name and USA Today or Forbes or ESPN or any national news source. You're good, okay? However, if that's not the case, then you need to look for information that makes the author credible. So I scrolled to the bottom of the website and I found a snippet about Carol Dweck. Now, if that's not there, guess what you can do? You can check and see if there's an about section from the website that gives you some kind of credibility statement, something that makes us feel good. You know, one of my favorite movies from the 90s was Tommy Boy, and there's this really funny joke about this idea of a guarantee. And, you know, the lead actor, Chris Farley, was always like, a guarantee, like, you know, that just makes you feel all warm and cuddly at night. Whether it's true or not, it doesn't matter, but having some kind of guarantee on a product you buy makes you feel better. And that's how I feel about the credibility. I really want you to give us some kind of credibility statement so that we can feel warm and cuddly and believe that your source is actually credible. So what do? Well, we scroll to the bottom of the page. However, if that was not the case, then maybe we could scroll to the very, very, very bottom of the website and we can look for an about. And so I'm looking around, I'm looking for some kind of about. Oh, here we go, about us. And this could possibly tell us about what's going on with this site. So independent nonprofit, publisher of Education Week. Sorry, that's right here. And that might be good enough. But because it's a testimony, we really want the credibility of the author. So in that case, we have that. So the next part is to take the credibility statement and, of course, take the identifier of the source itself, and we want to explain it. So you just simply take I and C and you put it into one coherent, complete sentence that goes in your outline. So in this case, if it's a testimony, it's really simple, right? Because now all I have to say is according to Dweck, in 2015, according to Dweck, who's a psychology at Stanford and author of Mindset, Psychology of Success, comma, and then I would just insert the testimony and I would be done. How did I do that? Well, I summed up the main idea of the source, or in this case, I quoted the testimony, and I put the author's last name, Dweck, the year of publication, 2015, and the credibility statement because it's a testimony and because this is from a website that's not a nationally recognized news source in the statement. And I was done. And that was how easy it was. So I know this probably seems a little bit confusing. And so what I'll do is I'll actually type this out for you so that you really understand it. So again, because this was a testimony, I simply gave the last name of the author, which was Dweck. And this was in 2015. So you have that. Credibility statement was psychology professor at Stanford. And that is all you need. We have the last name, we have the year, and we also have some kind of credibility statement. Because this is a testimony, we want to make sure that we are clear about what makes them an expert. So we say, an author of Mindset, Psychology of Success. And I know I spelled that wrong. And we're good. Now, if it wasn't a testimony, then I think the psychology professor at Stanford would probably be good enough. But for this case, I want to be extra careful. All right? Now, you're probably asking me, well, Adam, this all sounds well and good, but what happens if you can't find a good enough credibility statement? Well, don't worry. I've got that figured out too. So I came across this interesting source from Edudemic, and we have the author, Sarah Muethler, and she's talking about a ton of different things about mindsets, okay? But particularly what was interesting was I found that in this one specific part of her writing, and of course now I'm having a hard time finding it. Well, I know why, because I'm looking at the wrong one. It's actually right here. So it's actually Sarah Peck. Wow, that's interesting. They both have the first name Sarah. I found something really interesting here, and I thought that, oh, this could actually work. But unfortunately, there was a couple problems. So I found this testimony from her, and she said that people with a fixed mindset avoid difficult situations, they refuse to challenge themselves, and yada yada yada. People will avoid difficult situations, refuse to challenge themselves, and effectively evaluate every situation to see if it will make them look smart or dumb, whether they will success or fail. So do you notice how that's not spelled correctly? That kind of freaked me out a little bit. And then I looked for the credibility statement, and this is author, writer, business owner, and then yoga teacher. The problem is that there's really nothing about her that says anything about her understanding of mindsets. And so in a situation like this, you could go to the about section. However, if you don't feel like this website has one, then maybe you should just move on and say, you know what, this isn't really a good enough source. But what if you find a source that's actually citing someone else? Well, that is an interesting question. So I found this source, and this is, of course, the other Sarah. This is the one I just showed you, Sarah Muethler. It was very interesting. They had a source from Carol Dweck discussing in a TED Talk. And so you have two choices here, okay? If you find yourself where you have a source within a source, where you have, for instance, Sarah Muethler talking about Carol Dweck, try to go to the direct source. In this case, I can click the link and it will take me to the TED Talk, and I can actually cite this TED Talk. However, if you don't want to do that, then you have another option. And you know what that is? Well, you can simply say, okay, according to Muethler, so that was the author of the source in 2015, Carol Dweck, and then you would give the credibility statement for Carol Dweck, so psychology professor at Stanford, and I will make this fit. This is fun when you do it on the fly, so you can see that I'm actually not scripting this, but actually going through this. Talked about ... and then tell what Carol Dweck actually talked about. So if you find a source that's citing someone else, then all you got to do is give credit to the person that's being cited, but make sure that you make it clear it is a secondary source by saying where you got it from. So in this case, we know that this is from Sarah Muethler in 2015, and it's from a website. We don't have to worry about credibility as long as we have credibility for the actual person that's within it. So if that's confusing for you, I can re-explain that. But either way, I want to make sure that you take away something very important. This is a process to not only help your audience believe what you're saying, but also it previews the main idea of your source, so it's very easy for us to see how this supports your main point. So remember, let's go back in time, and I want to show you page 30, that this is exactly what it's supposed to look like. One sentence that summarizes the source and showcases credibility of the author, including the year and the author's last name. And if you do that, you're in great shape, okay? Let me know if you have any questions, and I look forward to seeing the iced out source. Remember that you're going to use the source that you used for Prep 3. So you just want to ice that out. So you don't have to find more sources. You just have to ice that one out appropriately, and I will be checking to see how you did. All right, great job.